Welcome back to the channel, guys. Last week I went over the first part of the 12 principles of animation, and this week I'm going to be continuing on those concepts and principles. Last week I went over squash and stretch, slow in, slow out, and arc. So if you missed that part of it, please go back and check the older videos that I have. Today I'm going over anticipation, staging, secondary action, and exaggeration. Also, quick note, I was so excited to get started on the principles of animation last week that I forgot to even explain where these principles came from. And I'm just going to read a little something I found online, which was basically that the Disney animators, Ollie Johnston and Frank Thomas, in their 1981 book, The Illusion of Life, Disney Animation, it says, Johnston and Thomas in turn based their book on the work of the leading Disney animators from the 1930s onwards, and their efforts to produce more realistic animations. The main purpose of the principles were to produce an illusion of characters adhering to the basic laws of physics, but they also dealt with the more abstract issues such as emotional timing and character appeal. So that is the basics, why these principles exist from those two animators back in the 1930s. Anticipation is used to prepare the audience for an action and to make the action appear more realistic. A dancer jumping off the floor has to bend his knees first. A golfer making a swing has to swing the club back first. The technique can also be used for less physical actions, such as a character looking off screen to anticipate someone's arrival, or attention focusing on an object that a character is about to pick up. In this ball flower animation I did, I'm going to show you the instances where I used anticipation. I used it several times. So before this ball moves, I squashed him, and then he springs off like so, and then here, of course, and then he lands. Now before he starts sniffing the flower, I took my time with it as far as just a simple sniff. But on the second sniff, this is his natural position here. Then he squashes down low and shoots right into the sniff. And then I push that sniff as much as I think I can for that pose. And then another example of anticipation is this move where he's just a normal ball. You see him squash down some more, and then that. So those are my instances of anticipation in the ball flower animation. Exaggeration is an effect especially useful for animation, as perfect imitation of reality can look static and dull in cartoons. The level of exaggeration depends on whether one seeks realism or a particular style, like a caricature or the style of a specific artist. The classical definition of exaggeration employed by Disney was to remain true to reality, just presenting it in a wilder, more extreme form. Other forms of exaggeration can involve the supernatural or surreal, alterations in the physical features of a character, or elements in the storyline itself. It is important to employ a certain level of restraint when using exaggeration. If a scene contains several elements, there should be a balance of how those elements are exaggerated in relation to each other to avoid confusing or overawing the viewer. Okay, so the example I'm going to show you for exaggeration is basically just these little movements here where I try to push the sniffing as much as I can, and then these very large, like his jaw is pretty much broken on these poses, and then there, that solid chomp down. And then, you know, just stretching as much as I can these poses. But yeah, so the sniffing and the chomp. Secondary action. Adding secondary actions to the main action gives a scene more life and can help to support the main action. A person walking can simultaneously swing his arms or keep them in his pockets, speak or whistle, or express emotions through facial expressions. The important thing about secondary actions is that they emphasize rather than take away from the main action. If the latter is the case, these actions are better left out. For example, during a dramatic movement, facial expressions will often go unnoticed. In these cases, it is better to include them at the beginning and at the end of the movement rather than during. Okay, so secondary action, how I'm going to show this example is with the prior example I used in the last video, which is this ball with an arc. It's just a simple bouncy ball, and what I did is I added a tail to the ball. So, and I would say the way you want to handle the secondary action is that there's going to be lag behind with the object. This should have been smoothed out a little bit better, but it's fine. So if you notice, I'm gonna turn on onion skin. Actually, I want it to be the whole thing to be onion skin. So if you notice, the tail is moving in its own little arc. It has its own set path that it follows. And what I tried to do is that wherever the ball was, I would show the tail lagging behind. So the ball is here, and then on the next one, the tail is still following that old arc. Ball's here, it's still whipping around like that, and so on and so forth. Ball flower. Okay, so with ball flower, if you pay attention to my flower, I tried to do secondary action too with that, where it pops up here. And when he starts sniffing heavily, it's still moving as he sniffs, because it's like, because he's breathing in that sweet scent of flower. And if you notice, you probably don't notice it because it's happening at the same time, but he chomps this flower down, and let me zoom in. And if you look closely here, actually let me get in even closer. If you look closely, let me just do that again. So he's about to chomp this flower down, right? Chomp. the stem is still arching towards his mouth. And then in the next frame, it raises up a little bit. And then the next frame, that's where it stops raising. But that can also be considered secondary action because things are still going. Like, it didn't just get chomped and then stay bent over. You know, it has a lifespan and reaction and things like that. Staging. This principle is akin to staging in theater, as it is known in theater and film. Its purpose is to direct the audience's attention and make it clear what is of greatest importance in a scene. Johnston and Thomas defined it as the presentation of any idea so that it completely and unmistakably clear whether the idea is an action, a personality, an expression, or a mood. This can be done by various means, such as the placement of a character in the frame, the use of light and shadow, or the angle and position of the camera. The essence of this principle is keeping focus on what is relevant and avoid unnecessary detail. As far as staging is concerned, I feel like with this animation I could have moved this character to the middle of the screen, but I'm not confident with camera movements just quite yet, so I just made sure that to keep the character in screen. If you're not comfortable moving your camera around your character, just make sure that you're framing so that your character is at least in screen. And then, of course, I would say as you develop your animating skills, just practice. And later on, I do have some exercises that we're going to do together where we are moving the camera and we are doing some camera movements. And just so you can get an overall feel of what that is like. Alright, so that was the video. Hopefully it was helpful. And if it was helpful, leave me a thumbs up or a comment saying that it helped you out. If there was anything in the video that I rushed over and you felt like you needed more description, more detail, maybe even a different example, just let me know and I'll make sure to get on that. Well, this is part 2 of the 3-part series. The next part is going to go really fast. Some of the examples you've already seen, but you're going to see them again in the next video. So stay tuned, hit subscribe if you don't want to miss it, and get ready for some great animation exercises.